Welcome to episode 8 of the Indy Author Podcast, and today my guest is Robert Blake Whitehill. Robert is the award-winning author of the best-selling Ben Blackshot series, which is available in English and German. He's the winner of the Hamptons International Film Festival and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation Screenwriting Fellowship for Unexploded Ordinance, and the Hudson Valley Film Festival for Blue Rinse, and was a finalist for the Telluride Indy Fest for Blue Rinse. He's a proud native of Maryland's Eastern Shore and now lives in New Jersey with his family. Welcome, Robert.
It is a pleasure to be with you, Maddie, particularly because I was just reading the last 20 or so pages of your manuscript for Rock, Paper, Scissors. It's an exciting read. It was almost hard for me to jump off this manuscript to come and be with you here, but I love to.
Robert, you're the best. You're the best. And I had the same reaction in reading your Dead Rise. So we're doing each other a favor there, keeping each other entertained.
Absolutely. That's our mission, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So we're going to be talking about screenwriting today. And screenwriting is a totally unfamiliar area to me, and I suspect it's a pretty unfamiliar area to many of my listeners. And so we'll probably cover some pretty basics, but I wanted to start out with a question. What came first for you, novel writing or screenwriting?
Believe it or not, screenwriting, I simply looked at the economics of it and said, playwrights get so much money, novelists get so much money, but screenwriters, at the time I was looking at it, they were, getting hundreds of thousands of dollars for writing a simple idea on the back of a napkin. And, I'm thinking Joe Esterhazy in particular back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I said, that's a great way to invest my time. And then I look at a novel and a novel can be around 100,000 words. Well, a screenplay is about 20,000. The thing that I realized once I dived into screenwriting is you have to pick with such care the words that you choose in a screenplay. It's almost as if in a novel you've got a little room to ramble, a little room to explore ideas and inner thinking, but it's kind of like a long form haiku, a screenplay. It's got to be done there are a lot of industry parameters and specifics and formatting and just things that you have to know to provide to producers and what they're expecting a little bit. The first being that, they just pick it up and see, does it weigh too much? Meaning, is it too long? And it can be that simple. And then there's the other nightmare myth where they read the first 10 pages and the last 10 pages. And if they like it, you're in. They'll give it a good, thoroughgoing read. Those are some of the myths that I suspect are not exactly as mythological as people might like to think.
So does that hold true whether that's a movie screenplay or a television treatment, would that also be called a screenplay?
They can be called scripts, screenplays, teleplays, and I'm not as familiar with pitching an original idea for television. When I've written for television for Discovery Channel on shows like The New Detectives or The Bureau or Daring Capers, basically I was hired by a company and they had a format in mind to which I had to conform and make the voice of my writing sound like the voice of existing shows in prior seasons. So there's a little bit more that was sort of given to me that I would, basically not, imitate, I guess is a fair word. It's not me trying to roll out a new idea as a potential created by kind of title or a showrunner, which is the big name at the front of any series. So I would say I really can't answer that with any degree of accuracy just because I was hired to write those TV shows and they had kind of they were a going concern at the time I stepped aboard, and I just basically joined a team with a concept in place.
And how did you get into that role?
That was through connections. I was very fortunate that I was, introduced as a writer to a head writer on a show, a company that is hired by Discovery to make programs for Discovery. Took an interest. So I did a writing test.
Really?
Yes. They said, they gave me a few examples of the show, and they said, here's a case. It was a forensics show, so it was about murder. How would you write X number of pages of the show? So I said, okay, I looked at their material, and I looked at the case, and then I came up with something that I thought had a similar voice to what they already had and what they were doing regularly. and had already been approved by Discovery, which is more to the point. We've got so many bosses, and once we've finished our initial manuscripts, of course, as you already know, and I passed that test. They liked what I did.
What were the experiences that you were bringing to that uh, to the test you took that suited you to that work?
I think it was just an innate writing sense, an ability to absorb a voice, a style of writing, and then to relay facts of a case in an interesting way that was, maybe slightly purple, maybe slightly a little turgid in styling, so that, it was a little bit like a fact-based Penny Dreadful in a way. But I couldn't go over the top,
Right.
but there were certain things, certain life experiences from reading and turns of phrase, and that seemed to fill the bill. And other than that, I would just have to say life experience is what got me that role. I mean, I've taken other writing tests, like for soap opera writing, and it wasn't a fit. But for writing forensic stuff, and the interesting thing is, I came to, volunteer on our town's ambulance after I did that work on the TV show. And now, of course, between writing for the New Detectives, working on the ambulance, the seamier, grittier, macabre side of the Ben Blackshaw series, I've got so many things to draw upon now. But I was kind of riffing there at the beginning with the New Detectives.
Okay. So when you have an idea now, a new idea for a story you want to tell, how do you go about deciding whether you want to frame that up as a book or frame it up as a screenplay?
That's a very good question. Right now, I do have some, free standalone screenplays that are circulating around, and that's good for me to have from before. But now that I'm working on the Blackshaw series, I'm more looking for stories that might fit that Blackshaw filter, that might be something that he and his co-characters might be involved in. So it's a little bit of a different kind of a storyline. There's got to be some water involved because he lives on Smith Island in the Chesapeake Bay, though that's not necessary. The fourth book in the series, Geronimo Hotshot, takes place in the American Southwest, in Arizona, in the borderlands with Mexico. So that is the driest of dry land. So it need not necessarily be that, but I'm kind of sorting for potential Blackshaw adventures. Ideas come to me through wrongs that he needs to right, injustice that he needs to set straight. And maybe it has its existence in newspapers or Southern Poverty Law Center or other places where, news that needs to be reported but is underreported. I can play with those as plots because he is, in his character, kind of a moral enforcer. He wants to do right, bring justice, avenge wrongs. So that's the sort of filter I'm working through right now when I'm sorting for ideas.
Okay. And is screenwriting for you a solo activity, or is that something that you do in partnership with other people?
I'm not formally trained as a screenwriter, so I really benefited from an early collaboration with a good friend, a couple of people I've collaborated with, and I find that your first draft is a little bit more developed if you've worked with a partner because you've had a chance to spitball ideas back and forth. That's good for when you're cutting your teeth, making your bones, learning your craft. But for me, there came a time when I wanted to be able to write faster. So partnerships, existing scripts written with partnerships, they're still in existence. They get their circulation. Sometimes they get optioned and get into the development chain. But for me now, I prefer writing solo. Now, for other people, formal training, you already get that kind of a collaborative environment. You're collaborating with your professor. You're collaborating with classmates. If you're not formal trained, there's Screenwriting University and other areas, plenty of books on the subject where you can learn so that if you're, let's say, a novelist who wishes to have a screenplay adaptation of your novel, you can learn how to do that. It is just a new craft, but it's always storytelling. Structure is key, and having a good turn of phrase and being able to write crackling dialogue, those things help.
Okay. You had mentioned a couple of terms like optioned, and I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you could use Unexploded Ordinance or Blue Rinse, walk through the development of that to help explain some of those terms and the process that you go through to nurture a screenplay through its life.
Well, if you or a representative or your representative have presented a script to someone in the industry who is a decision maker, who has the power to sign on with the clout of their name or with financial backing or both, um, then what they do is they option it. It's essentially they're renting the exclusive right to represent your work for a period of time. And in exchange for that, they give you money and you vet their wherewithal. Does the check clear? Do you like the terms of the overall agreement, which is doped out in a short form or a deal memo? And then they go to work. Maybe they'll have some ideas for rewrites, and you have to be comfortable with that. And that would be, memorialized in the agreement
Mhm.
that you've got. That there might be a rewrite or two, and beyond a certain point, you'll get paid for additional rewrites in addition to the option fee. And then they begin to gather allies around the property in order to get it made. And that could be financing, that could be getting elements attached. An element could be an actor, an element could be a director, finding more and more champions for the idea. And let's say with Ben Blackshot, yes, it started as a novel, and it was just one novel, and me shouting in the wilderness, saying, with my PR firm that, was helping me get bloggers to talk about it. And then I actually called a classmate I hadn't spoken to, Stephanie Bell from Hatline Productions. And by that time, I had two or perhaps three books out. And I had known her in school. She was an actor, and I was an actor at the time. She'd moved on into producing stage plays, and then she was producing film. So I said, Stephanie, take a look at this property, see what you think of it for feature films. And she said, I want to do them all. I
Really?
want to do them all. And then the option agreement proceeded from there. So does that help you understand a little bit about what an option can be?
Yep, absolutely. So, where do things stand with the Ben Blackshaw effort?
Well, we are in that development phase. It can be interminable or feel thankless, but what we're doing right now is we're refining the property itself, making the script sing, and we've got it in a very good place. And now we're gathering some allies. I wish I could go into the wonderful people that we're talking to right now, but since nothing's locked, it's not a matter of jinxing. I just don't want to dissuade anybody by sounding like a blabbermouth or something.
Yep.
But we've got some incredibly powerful folk in the feature film industry, and they are looking really hard at it. But it's interesting, they're looking at it not only as a possible feature, but as series material. And series are very interesting because you can dig way deeper into secondary characters and subplots, and they can really allow you in 8 or 13 or 20 hours to explore far more than you might be able to in the 2-hour feature film format. But a
Yeah.
feature film is a great introduction to an overall idea, I would have to say.
Well, the series that springs to mind for me is Longmire, where I
Oh,
love the books and watched the series. And I think that what they did there is that they would take a small part of a particular book. If you're
hmm
familiar with the books, you can watch a particular show in the series and then say, "Oh, I recognize where they got that idea," but then they expand it beyond what they did in the book. The general story arc is very much like the books, but the details are, as you're saying, expanded out, and it is pretty exciting to be able to spend that extra time.
isn't it great?
Yeah. And do you continue as the writer through that whole process? Is it possible that at some point someone else would take over the screenwriting side of Ben Blackshaw?
It is a possibility, but in order for me to remain at the table where decisions are being made, I don't say as a decision maker, because once more powerful entities come into play, I am, of course, I'm working at their beck, essentially. But in order for me to stay at that decision making table for a little bit longer, yes, I did, because of my background, want to be the person to take the first whack at adapting the screenplay and plant my flag as to what the vision for the script could be. And I'm adapting the second book into a screenplay, and I will adapt the third book into a screenplay. Typically, if they want to get you off of a script, they'll either say you don't have the right to do it, or they'll kick you upstairs into a more of a production role, a consultancy role. But being a hybrid with experience in both formats, the novel and the screenplay, it seems, as in the case of Scott Smith and many other novelists who have also adapted their own work, Scott Smith, who wrote A Simple Plan, for instance, in The Ruins, and he does his own scripts and boldly changes some of his outcomes.
Really?
I was very surprised because I thought that part of what he would do as a novelist staying as a screenwriter would just be defend to the bitter end every little idea in the novel. But he and the producers made decisions that said, you know what, this outcome in this medium might be a little bit better, might be a little more impactful, and plus it threw me a kind of a cool curve and was a great education that a novel is a novel and it will always be the novel. But when you adapt it into a new medium, now you're talking, there may be more significant changes. You may discover that in that visual medium where you can't dive headlong into the thought process of a character, unless, of course, you are defining that thought process by the character's actions, which is, in essence, their truth in many respects. You've got some significant changes to consider. And many of them are very simply, well, do you have a scene in Asia, for instance, because we've got backers from Asia. Do you have a scene? Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I could put one in,
right?
Or that's something that you'll find. So that wonderful, talented actors and actresses from China, from Hong Kong, they can be included, and that'll make that property more interesting to that marketplace. Mm-hmm. So there are all kinds of things. Once you finish, you get that first draft, it's all yours, baby. It's all yours. But as soon as other people take an interest and begin investing their sweat equity or their hard cash, you got to listen to them and their concerns. And typically, if they're in that position or have gotten into that position where they're accomplished enough and respected enough to wield that kind of power in the industry, their advice is well worth taking. It's not going to be worse. Yes, sometimes you get like an Ishtar, or sometimes you get like 37 writers credited and uncredited on the Flintstones movie or something like that, where everybody just sort of throws up their hands and they just start throwing writers at a problem when, I don't know, I wasn't part of that process, so I can't figure where it all went off the rails. But I think it's important for me, for the Blackshot franchise, to be at least, if not a decision maker, a listener to the ideas that other people are putting forth.
Well, I would think that one of the areas that a writer would definitely want to be involved in is the casting. And one of the funniest experiences that I've had at book clubs that I've attended has been to hear the people that that the readers picture from my books. And sometimes I'll go, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. You had made some suggestions. I thought, yeah, oh, absolutely. If I could get those people in the movie version of my books, that would be great. And every once in a while you hear one, you think, oh my goodness, what did I do wrong?
Somebody once said that they thought Harrison Ford would make a good Ben Blackshot. And I absolutely agree. Mm-hmm. But my thinking is he'd make a better Ben Blackshaw's dad today.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, when they think Harrison Ford, what decade do they have in minds? Because Ben is in his late 30s, early 40s, in that sort of nebulous age range where we can find so many potential leading guys.
So if you were coming up with your dream Ben Blackshaw, who would it be? Can you say?
That is a difficult question, because a lot of that conversation is actually being realized in submissions today to those very people. Mm-hmm. So I would have to say that there are a lot of potential candidates that bring extremely different qualities to it. But it could be someone who's, very physical, like a Channing Tatum. There could be somebody who is like a little bit more of the Loki energy, like, as in Loki, the Norse god, not low key. Loki, like Chris Pratt, who's mischievous.
Uh-huh.
You've got a lot of different potentialities there. And sometimes you're imagining them against type. You're casting against the role that they've usually played, because Ben Blackshaw's kind of he's more of a laconic guy. It's not that he is a hermit or anything like that. He just doesn't speak much, and when he does, it's very much to the point. And if somebody is known better as in comedic roles, that would represent a change for that actor, which could be very cool for their career, or completely destroy their brand. You never know
Right.
how people are going to be responding, but it all depends on like you said, the casting and the relationship that the cast has with the director.
Okay. When I was reading through your list of awards here, and Unexploded Ordinance, having read Ben Blackshaw, I totally can understand that you would write a screenplay called Unexploded Ordinance. But Blue Rinse, I have to ask, if I had to guess the title of something that a Ben Blackshaw author would write, Blue Rinse would not be it. What is the story behind Blue Rinse?
It's a little lyrical, yes. The actual story of the script is three older ladies are accidentally run over the enemy of the town mobster. They just mow him down with their car. It's an accident. Mm-hmm. The mobster's grateful that they did the favor, gives them a little money, sends them on their way, says, we won't call the police. But a few days later, he realizes that older women are invisible in America, and he blackmails that trio into being his new hit team. So
I like it.
It's that dark, edgy comedy where, they're well paid for their work. They grow into it reluctantly, of course. And unfortunately, part of the invisibility that older women suffer in America is because they're financially disenfranchised. But when they have more money, they start to become more visible and skyline themselves and drawing attention. So it was two ideas that came together to form that. One was, I belonged to a Quaker meeting in Montclair here, and one of the members of the meeting shot a documentary video called Crones, and it was about Quaker women in retirement homes and how many of them feel overlooked, warehoused, and where their talents and wisdom and nurturing capacities were not being tapped. So that was an untapped resource. And then I saw the movie Devil's Advocate, in which Al Pacino said, I dress down, I take the subway. He's, of course, Satan and incredibly wealthy, and nobody sees me coming. And I said, well, what if the wrong person exploited exactly the wrong traits and qualities of older women? And that's how that idea of exploiting an invisible class of people to be killers, running totally against their character as nurturers, though, like I said, they grow into it. They hit a glass ceiling in the business. They want to branch out on their own. There's all kinds of nuances that are really fun in that property. But I do have a dark sort of comedic side as well. And that's sort of a topsy-turvy world, I guess. Instead of young, chiseled, studly, hired killers, you've got these elderly ladies walking in with some really sharp knitting needles.
Yeah, it's closer to how I would think of Blue Rinse than I expected. I wasn't expecting that it was actually going to be about little old ladies, but that's kind of fun to hear.
But you know what? Try casting a little old lady these days. You'll probably find that it's a someone in the Meryl Streep range. I don't even know if they would look at Keaton. I love Diane Keaton. It would be really wonderful to see her cast in that, because she really knows how to mine an insecure character and having to go through with contract murder. I would love to see her play that, but it would probably be drawn down in age. I don't know. We'll see.
And is there anything going on with Unexploded Ordinance or Blue Rinse now?
They're being submitted around town. So yes, excuse me. Yes, I would say that with Unexploded Ordinance and Blue Rinse, they're being read by some wonderful people that I would be only too happy to work with. And I think that in the hands that my manager, Liza Ledford, has put them in, she's made some really wonderful choices, and they're responding well to the material. It's just how well. So we see where that goes.
So I would imagine most of that activity would be around LA. Is that true, or are there other sort of hotbeds, especially with indie movies? I would think that it would be more spread out than perhaps it was in the past, where it was probably all localized in LA or New York.
I think the lowering the technological and financial barriers to actually shooting a story to the degree to which we find them today, where you can take out your cell phone and craft a story from that. It's amazing that you can at least show that you've got the chops to visually tell a story. And so that definitely decentralizes much of the aspirants away from LA, New York, and Los Angeles or Toronto, London, Hong Kong, sort of filmmaking centers that we think of off the cuff. But that said, a lot of the companies that we're in touch with on the Blackshot side are based in Los Angeles, but some of the properties we're finding the producers actually living on location where some of their TV series are being shot. So we find them all over. But here, for instance, the way you and I are working together now on Skype, we don't have to be in the same room to hold an interview. I can have, it was years writing The New Detectives before I ever met my head writer face to face. And that was just for coffee. It wasn't on business. And most of our business was conducted over the phone. Now we've got Skype, FaceTime. There's so many ways for us to aggregate all the resources from remote places. But I think Los Angeles is still an important center. But from what I hear, everybody's doing business pretty much like you and I are right now over Skype, even if they're in the same town.
Yep.
Interesting.
I hope that they wouldn't relocate Ben Blackshot to somewhere else. I hope they wouldn't say, this is great, but it would really be better if it were outside Seattle or something like that. That would be disappointing.
It really depends on the producers. I mean, Washington, D.C. has some wonderful production facilities, which would mean that you could shoot interiors in D.C. studio spaces, but you could always revert back to the actual Smith Island for your exteriors, which I think would be, of course, a real boon financially to Smith Island itself, which is such a quiet and lovely and remote place. So, but there are a lot of options. I mean, there was a Message in a Bottle that was originally conceived of being shot on Tangier Island, also in the Chesapeake Bay, just a few miles south of Smith Island. And there was, it didn't work out. They didn't get the agreement to shoot on Tangier Island. So Message in a Bottle was shot on Martha's Vineyard. So, for every awesome location, there are probably surrogates that could step in elsewhere in the world. But, being a Marylander, I'm certainly plumping for the folks on Smith Island to get at least the exterior shot there.
Yeah, describe a little bit about Smith Island for people who might not be familiar with it.
That's a great question. It's not technically an island in and of itself. It's a bunch of little islands with rivulets and streams running through them. There's marshland, beach, and just sort of not parkland, but wildlife refuges as well. So there are 3 hamlets on Smith Island, and 2 of them you can walk between. The third one is you can only get to by boat. Mm-hmm. And folks have been, particularly the initial immigrants from Cornwall, have been making their living from the Chesapeake Bay in various ways. Waterfowl, fishing, oysters, clams. For a while there was a terrapin or a tortoise business, but they just sort of couldn't reproduce fast enough to supply the incredible demand. So that business was set aside. The Maryland terrapins you might have heard of, there's a reason that they got that name. There are more terrapin sports players right now and athletes than there are actual terrapins alive, just because they were so over-harvested. But they're good at what they do on Smith Island.
Yeah.
So they are primarily Methodists today. There's a church in each hamlet, and one minister serves all 3, staggering the services throughout Sunday morning. And they are wonderful, rich people. They have their own kind of patois, mm-hmm. where they have, sayings and expressions that harken back to decades to centuries ago. And from Cornwall, where they came over here, and there was a time when the ancestors of the current residents, were pirates. So part of the plot of Dead Rise is having them connect with their inner pirate in order to repel an outside invasion.
Yeah.
When in fact they're just really incredibly hardworking, good people who are happy and content to be Methodists. But man, when they get their dander up, they really connect with that inner pirate.
I can imagine there would be many Hollywood character actors who would be very excited about playing some of those Smith Island residents when that movie gets made.
I'm a recovering actor myself, and I would love to take on a small background kind of
That would be
role.
fantastic.
Oh, it would be so neat just to see folks doing it and see if I could, get my chops back. But yeah, I think acting was really important for me to learn how to write, actually, memorizing all those great English language writing for the stage. Yeah, that was a big help.
That's fantastic. Well, we'll have to get together again sometime and talk more about your novel specifically and your background of acting as well. But I've
But
loved the information about screenwriting, and why don't you let our listeners know where they can find out more about you and your books and your screenplays?
sure, you can learn all about the books at my website, and the address is very simple. It's my name, robertblakewhitehill.com. robertblakewhitehill.com. You'll learn where I'm speaking, you'll learn where I'm signing, learn about the books in English and their translations into German through the wonderful publisher Lucifer Verlag. And if you want to track the movie side of things a little bit more closely, go to Hatline Productions, Hatline, hatlineproductions.com, and they have fairly regular updates on where things are on the feature film side. So that's a great thing, as a great resource as well. But certainly robertblakewhitehill.com, learn about the books. My email address is there. If you've got further questions that you'd like to pose, I would be happy to respond. I make sure, maybe a little slow sometimes, but I do respond to my emails.
That is great. Well, thank you so much, Robert. This has been very interesting.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much, Maddie.
Thank you.